Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to my video critique of Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic, otherwise KOTOR for short. As a brief introduction, Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic is a single-player RPG often touted as the best Star Wars game of all time, and by extension heralded as one of the greatest video games of all time. Despite the game's near universal praise from gamers and fans of Star Wars, this game is filled to the brim with both terrible as well as downright baffling design choices. This game is wildly overrated. For some context, the game tells a simple tale of a planet-hopping adventure. The player goes from a soldier of the Republic to a Jedi to facing the Dark Sith Lord. Go find the Death Star equivalent and blow it up. Standard Star Wars stuff. The story of this game gets a lot of praise when it really shouldn't. The simple premise isn't the problem, it is all the other writing present. KOTOR pretends to have an expansive world, but its shallowness is intrusive. As such, that's where I'll start with the single worst offender in the game. The first major issue is the game's morality system, which brings with it a couple of issues. Problem number 1. The first and most prominent issue plaguing both Knights of the Old Republic games, and admittedly many other RPGs, is the morality system present. Forced morality is almost certainly the single largest blight impacting any role-playing games that includes it. Main quests usually only have a light side or dark side option. When finishing most side quests, however, you generally have 3 options. Refuse monetary reward for light side points, accept the money as is, gain no alignment points, or grab the money, kill the person, and gain dark side points. There are certain benefits/rewards for maxing out an alignment. Firstly, force powers assigned to light or dark cost less if you have matching alignment, and both light side and dark side have roughly equivalent force abilities. Force heal is the same as Death Field, and Force Status is the same as Insanity, Force Lightning, Force Wave, etc, etc. As such, it makes sense to prioritize one of these routes as you won't require the other. Secondly, some items are restricted to having a high light side or dark side alignment. Thirdly and finally, you gain additional effect if your alignment is maxed out based on which Jedi class you choose. The issue is that you should choose the actions your character takes because you choose them. It is a role-playing game. I should be able to choose the role I want to play. There is no reward for staying neutral, only perfectly good or perfectly evil, the two worst written paths in this game. Goody two-shoes versus raging psychopath. Light side/dark side is required for the strongest equipment, gear, etc. and it discourages you from not maxing out one of these two pathways, which wouldn't be a problem if the game actually wrote these sides well, which it doesn't. Outside of Chrono Trigger, which ditched the morality system rather quickly, the only other instance off the top of my head where this is an improvement is Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines. In Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines, the goal is to keep your humanity high to stop yourself from frenzying, which will cause Masquerade violations. Also, having a low humanity also limits dialogue options in the game, which is the point. The morality system is not supposed to be a two-side scaler, but rather about to keep your humanity high. It is a form of resource management. Problem number 2 I've got with the morality system is that morality is subjective, but boy does KOTOR have some hot takes. Killing an intragalactic slaver is dark side, but accepting a bribe he would have paid for through said intragalactic slaving isn't. Sorry, what? Willingly fighting Bendak in the means he requested is also dark side, as well as killing the highly invasive species of Gizga on your ship, but contrastingly you don't get any dark side points for genociding the Sand People Enclave, countless Circle Workers, the Sith Embassy, or the Sith Academy, most of which in the latter's case are probably teenagers. Next up on the complaint block, I had your companions, the characters you'll be spending the entire game with. Starting with Trask Ulgo, Trask is our first companion, being our guide for the tutorial. He isn't our companion for long, and there's not much to say about him as he decides to take on Darth Bandon sacrificially like a complete badass. Not for nothing as I like Trask, and I know I'm not alone here, but why not just have Carth as our companion here? It'd give him more time for us to build rapport with him in this heavily scripted tutorial. Speaking of which, Carth Onasi. Carth is the first real companion we're introduced to and is most popularly known for the phrase, "I don't want to talk about it." The character is simple enough to grasp. War hero of the Republic. He isn't particularly deep, but that's not the problem with him at all. Carth's problem is twofold. Firstly, Carth being a famed war hero places him in the perfect position to be the de facto leader of the group for any set progress of time, or at least to insert strategic advice. However, the way the game is structured places our protagonist as the lead with very little opportunities for the other companions to intercede in dialogue with other in-game NPCs. The story of our character is a standard zero to hero plotline, so having him take up leading roles throughout the game makes plenty of sense for our RPG in question. However, without Carth's attempt to take a lead position, even if just for the first act, it makes him seem somewhat impotent or flat. It kinda makes sense on Taris, considering he is a highly recognizable fugitive where your character isn't, but it seems like he never tries to make that step up when he really should have. Carth's second issue, on the other hand, the aforementioned "I don't want to talk about it" quote, this one line has been memed to death, and for good reason. Carth's backstory is one of being a protege to his friend Saul Karath. Carth was born on Telos and had a wife and a son. Upon Revan and Malak's return from the Mandalorian Wars, however, Saul Karath betrays the Republic and orbitably bombards Telos, killing most of its population and rendering the planet inhospitable. Carth believes both his wife and son died in the attack, with his wife dying in his arms. None of this is initially known to the player when they first run into Carth Onasi, and Carth expectantly isn't too interested in divulging it. The way the game handles it is to prompt you to talk to Carth by telling you he looks like he has something to say. Talking to Carth will provide a brief, vague dialogue before he eventually closes up again, stating he doesn't want to talk about it. More specifically, this second issue is ultimately that impatience will lead you to give up caring. By the time Carth begins to open up, you've already acquired Mission, Zaalbar, Bastila, T3, and Canderous. Not only are many of these companions better in combat than Carth, in fact every companion in game save T3, who still has use as a skill jockey, and Trask, who's kinda dead, but some of the other companions who will converse with our character appear far more interesting and thus appealing. Add in that for a lot of players this is probably their first delve into a D&D based system, for which they'll likely struggle, means that they will probably likely leave Carth to get sidelined for better companions. The issue is that Carth's relevancy wanes the more companions you pick up. Just before he truly begins to open up is when you acquire companions who ultimately supersede him. If the game made another concerted effort to push you into learning Carth's story before the Leviathan, maybe a dedicated interaction on a Republic presence planet like Dantooine or Manaan, it could have gone a long way to investing you, the player, into his storyline. Juxtaposing Carth with Adan from the sequel really just exemplifies how weak Carth is as a character. Even if you don't like Adan, and you're fine to not, Adan is both funnier than Carth and reveals more depth to his character through his Nar Shaddaa questline. Adan also has much more combat relevance with his self-revive ability and even his sneak attack if you kept him as a scoundrel. It also helps that Adan gets his own designated moment in the storyline more than once, mind you. By comparison, Carth's just a chump. Ultimately, Carth felt like he should have had a lot more plot relevancy than he did. I brought him along with me on many plans because I thought he would, and correspondingly, I was noticeably disappointed. Next up, Mission Vale and Zaalbar. Missions written in such a way that feels remarkably accurate for a 14-year-old light-hearted scoundrel, all things considered, so props to that. Also, sneak attack makes her useful for combat on Taris if you use her. So yeah, we have a well-done companion. Good job. Might have been a good idea to change her name to something that isn't a common noun though. Alright, well, Mission's great, but Zaalbar still sucks. Combat-wise, he's fine when you get him, but Zaalbar's about as interesting as watching paint dry. As you land on different planets, you can ask your companions about what they think of each planet, offering insight into the location and your companion's worldview/outlooks. Zaalbar, however, will just refer you to Mission anytime you ask him. About the only time Zaalbar contributes to the story is on Kashyyyk, with the predictable coup d'etat story involving his father, corrupt brother, and corporate interests. Although this storyline is particularly predictable and not actually all that interesting, what specifically dooms it for Zaalbar is that he is held by the Wookiee tribe until the story arc finally reaches its denouement, meaning the one time Zaalbar is actually relevant to the plot and we don't even interact with him until the climax. He barely interacts with the Wookiees either. Also, in another bit of stupid design philosophy, he and Canderous both start off with ranged weapons, which would seemingly imply that you should build them for range, but both of them are generally much better with melee builds. Also, going on a tangent here, someone had pointed out that following the events of KOTOR, the fact that Mission and Zaalbar successfully start a large shipping business is quite ironic, considering the Zerka Corporation and enslaving Wookiees would likely discourage Zaalbar from pursuing a corporation, but we're digressing here, and while funny, it's not actually relevant to this critique. Canderous Ordo. A Mandalorian mercenary, Canderous isn't horrible but comes at a poor time, although, to be fair, there isn't really a better time for him to appear. In combat, he is a serviceable side grade to Carth range-wise, but isn't otherwise impressive, and the same is true melee-wise with Zaalbar. Canderous will admittedly tell your character some fun stories if you use him and talk to him, but realistically you could remove him from the game at Dantooine and no one would notice. I basically did the first time around, and I don't think that's a rarity either, considering Carth, Bastila, Mission, and Zaalbar all seem to have more prominence by this point for the player base to choose from. Speaking of which, why does he stick around after Taris? Giving him a motive to stick with the party would have been a great addition, whether it stems from a cutscene of him charging the Republic for his services, or having a scripted interaction with Kashyyyk, the Mandalorian leader who terrorizes the locals of Dantooine. Although, funnily enough, Canderous has a problem with this because it's beneath Mandalorians, and not the whole targeting a civilian population who he believes are responsible for fighting back. Look, I will give props, this is decently interesting writing for a character not so evil to be twirling his moustache. More dialogue in the game shows Canderous also doesn't like Kashyyyk for fleeing the final battle of the Mandalorian Wars instead of losing with the rest of the Mandalorians. Kashyyyk keeps his armor, whereas those who lost that final battle had it stripped from them as a humiliation, including Canderous himself. But this could have, or maybe even should have been, a much bigger moment. Not only does Canderous already not approve of Mandalorians becoming bandits, but Kashyyyk and presumably other Mandalorians were rumoured to be supported by the Sith in their Dantooine raiding. There's a perfect reason for Canderous to stick around with your party. I mean, come on, it writes itself. But it's not present. As it stands, Canderous is forgettable and it's a damn shame. Not only do I like his Mandalorian outlook, but his conversations with Carth and Bastila are similarly great. I will note though that the vast amount of his dialogue references how great Mandalore is, and Revan by extension for beating them. It's never Revan and Malak, it's only ever Revan. Kinda makes Canderous sound like a new toxic girlfriend. Ah, my darling is amazing. Have I mentioned them enough yet? Overall, Canderous is nice if underused, but as far as Mandalorian companions go, however, KOTOR 2's Mandalore is by far superior because he actually does have a continuing relevancy to the plot, and his own personal objectives of rebuilding a Mandalorian culture. T3M4. By far the worst companion across the two games, T3 in the first game has no personality, just a catalyst for a mandatory quest. Admittedly, his skills, them being security, computer, repair, etc., do make him useful for non-combat purposes, but it's disappointing considering just how much of a glow-up they gave T3 in the sequel, making him one of the best written companions. You only ever keep him as a skill jockey, especially as Force Q/heal won't work on droids, further hindering any combat potential. HK-47. Personality-wise, HK-47 is praised by the community and a lot of people hold him in high regard. HK is an assassin droid who is evil and humorously so. Honestly though, I've never really used him in the first KOTOR. His presence is justified only really for the light side playthrough, choosing to pick him up to have him converse with the Tuskens instead of reenacting Anakin's Episode 2 genocide as would be the dark side route. Though funnily enough, you can wholesale slaughter these natives without acquiring dark side points. It's kind of ironic though, you have to pick up the evil droid only if you're playing the quote-unquote good outcome. HK's main issue is his ironically near uselessness in combat. I mean, he's an assassin droid that is reasonably eclipsed in range combat by the likes of Carth, Mission, and or Canderous by this point, unless you have a high repair stat on your main character. Specifically 17 before the Leviathan. This unlocks his assassination protocols, which comes with a couple of stat bonuses for HK. Also, HK has an attribute of 16 in strength, for a character who physically can't use melee weapons. What was the design decision making here? Admittedly, HK is written well in both games, even if he's not particularly useful in either. And finally, the big three. otherwise known as the Jedi, Juhani, Jolee, and Bastila. Let's not be stupid, everyone wants Jedi in their party, especially in your first playthrough when Force powers are a new toy. They are both more viable in combat than all your other companions, but they also have a fun array of Force powers that you will enjoy abusing. Let that sink in, they are both stronger and more fun to use than your other companions. So why would you use your other companions then? First up is Juhani, and how do I put it this way, Juhani is weak. Juhani's character arc is struggling fighting off the temptations of the dark side and staying true to the light side of the Force. Assuming of course you didn't outright murder her on Dantooine. Actually, I like this mechanic a lot. You're tasked with removing the source of the dark side at the ruins which Juhani inhabits, and she is understandably hostile. You know, having fallen to the dark side but choosing to talk Juhani down instead of killing her feels like the game is actually testing if you are making light side decisions without forcing the bloody end onto it. Considering her character arc wouldn't work with someone intentionally playing for the dark side, removing this character from the ensemble doesn't hinder the game even if she is, or is at least supposed to be, a major character. But this is where my praise of her ends. There's also cut content of her being a lesbian. I only mention this because it's hopefully would have at least brought some personality to her, as she comes off as particularly flat and one-dimensional in a game where most of your companions already come off as flat and one-dimensional, but are still more interesting than Juhani. Admittedly, writing a character's one defining trait as gay is almost always a recipe for disaster, but she barely has any other traits to rely on. And hey, this would have made her the second homosexual character on the roster after Canderous' constant gushings over Revan. The issue with her character arc, in theory, is that it parallels your light side playthrough of the story as your character struggles to avoid the allure of dark side options. In reality, however, on the light side run, your character is such a goody two-shoes that make the Mormon's interpretation of Jesus blush. So because Juhani struggles so much with the temptation, but your character doesn't in the slightest, it makes Juhani seem pathetically weak and all her comments on the matter laughable. The only other companion who has a somewhat related story is Bastila, but there is no real relationship or interaction between the two, which honestly feels like her only real potential. The fact that Juhani can die before joining your crew likely relates to her being out of focus relative to most of the other cast. She has no banter lines with companions, even though she could have some wonderful ones with Mission, both of them growing up fending for themselves in Taris, as well as Zaalbar dealing with being hunted by other species. Bastila and Jolee could likewise make comments on Juhani's struggle with the dark side. The only character she really speaks with is Canderous if they're both in your party, on Dantooine. She just has nothing going for her. What a waste. Jolee, by contrast, needs no comments. Nothing but praise. Another great companion just like Mission. Effectively the Grandpa Jedi, a Padawan who fought in the war against Exar Kun before leaving the Jedi Order. He tells funny, insightful stories and criticizes others for their staunch viewpoints. He just feels, well, genuine. He also has a story about a boy and a snake that explains both his motivations and can potentially double as tragic foreshadowing. Ultimately, the highlight is that you can tease him and he chastises the correct way, making him come off as a friend. And lastly, Bastila. Before playing the game, one of the large impressions I got from the player base was that Bastila and her romance were top tier amazing. Wow, people have low standards, and this is coming from someone who has never been in a relationship. I guess coming off Attack of the Clones will do that to people. Bastila's main issue is that she is fun a grand total of one time, in her conversation with Mission. She doesn't take anything on the chin and chastises you for teasing her on the 2 occasions you get. In KOTOR 2, your banter with Adan actually makes him come off as both a romantic interest and just your friend as well. For lack of a better word, Bastila comes off as toxic, which isn't even really fair on her. She is an inexperienced Padawan who has such an imperative job to the war effort, and all the pressure that comes with it. Like, no wonder she has issues maintaining a fun demeanor and loses her patience when she's bullied. But your character coming off as a savior to her unfunness is like a basic Christian romance novel. Also, the Carth romance is evidently more endearing, once again proving that age-old RPG theorem that you should always play the female option rather than the male one. By and large, overwhelmingly most of your companions in this game have something missing. Either Jedi overshadow them in combat, you can't switch in your skill jockey because enemies are in the area, or they're just plain poorly written / explained, and leave something to be desired. Companions as a whole get a big step up in the sequel. Even if many of those companions still need improving, the combat viability increases for most of them, and they have another dimension to their character that is of interest relative to their counterparts from the first game. The specific unfortunate part about KOTOR's companions is that, with the exception of Jolee, honestly believe that Goto is a better written / more interesting character than every other companion in KOTOR, and no one can dispute this claim because no one's ever used Goto, even KOTOR 2 fans. Party size for RPGs as a whole usually varies between 3 or 4, with one slot near permanently dedicated to your main character who will almost always be in the party the entire game. This means you'd either have 2 or 3 slots for your total of 9 possible companions, 7 of which are mandatory companions. Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic has a party size of 3, meaning it chooses to have 2 slots reserved for your companions. A total party size of 3 may be ideal for combat in this game, however, your, and by your I mean you as in the player, not your character but them too, your relationships with the companions come off worse as a result. With only 2 out of 9 companions available, you're experiencing less than 1/4 of your companion pool at any one time, and sometimes it makes sense to have more than 2 present. Your experience can further be hindered if you take a liking to any of your companions. As aforementioned, Jolee is a perfect companion and will likely take up a permanent slot, meaning you now have 1 slot for the remaining 8 companions you're expected to rotate. One strategy the sequel KOTOR 2 employed was to have designated moments where you play as your companions. These scripted moments were usually amazing and gave your companions some spotlight to shine. The only time KOTOR implies this is on the Leviathan. One of the highlights I will praise this game for, however, is the inter-companion conversations. After playing with 2 specific companions for a shortish degree of time, they can jump into a scripted dialogue. These dialogues can explain character worldviews, i.e. the conversation between Carth and Canderous, giving them depth, or just be genuinely funny. The conversation between Mission and Bastila might be one of the only moments of Bastila I enjoyed in this game. There's less fun banter than KOTOR 2, but it's still a lovely addition regardless. Some companions will also have back and forth dialogue with NPCs, but this is a decent rarity, and unfortunately so. One of the other features this game includes is companion side quests. You can speak to your companions about various aspects of their life throughout the game, with this dialogue progressing as you complete more planets and progress the story. At some point in your dialogue, they will mention a character, and if you head to a specific planet, an NPC will greet you outside your ship, the Ebon Hawk, and start the side quest. From a conman brother, an estranged mother, a vengeful Mandalorian, all these side quests are great. It's just a shame you have to jump through an awful lot of hoops to get to them, talking to each of your companions once you've passed a certain story threshold, and then finding the questline starting point. In my first playthrough, I only discovered Jolee's on Manaan, which is a shame because these are the best written storylines and quests that the game has to offer, and they have stakes with your companions. These quests were what personally built my rapport with these companions, so requiring me to have spoken to these relatively uninteresting characters beforehand to get to this point was, I feel, a poor design choice, especially when Mr. I don't want to talk about it kept discouraging me away from such conversations. Also, why the hell is there a requirement for you to gather your companions before moving to the next location? Half the time a companion will stop moving spontaneously, and when you switch to that companion to move them, the other companion and your character will go sprinting to that exact location first before running to wherever you've moved your companion. It's annoying. Spoilers that matter are present from here on out, as we now move on to what many players experience as the single most defining moment of KOTOR. Darth Revan, the fallen Jedi who bested the Mandalorians, Darth Malak's former master, and the reason for the Jedi Civil War, the whole reason for the entire game, is revealed to be you, under Jedi brainwashing and a new identity. What a shock. Carth is horrified and tells the party. Let's look at the reactions of the party members and see how they react to this soul-shattering news. I mean, I've called them plain this whole time, but surely now is the time they'll step up and react meaningfully. Mission. Mission stands up for you, saying you're not like the Sith Lord anymore, even if you've been acting evil, and that Revan is another person that you aren't. Personally, I like missions detect objective vision, seeing it justly. This sort of logic is how I imagine I would have worked off when I was 14, rather than let's have a contingency just in case. It means her reaction can best be described though as doesn't care. Zaalbar. Zaalbar doesn't have too much to say, shocking, I know, on account of his life debt to you, so the revelation doesn't impact him. In short, doesn't care. Jolee. Jolee reveals I actually knew it was you, but didn't think it was his place to judge/interfere. In short, doesn't care. Juhani. Juhani commends your resistance to the temptations of the dark side, which makes sense when you consider that if she's in your party because you convince her to reject the dark side, it's personally reasonable. Still, the fact that Revan is the reason the dark side is so prevalent, considering that whole convert the Jedi and fight the Republic as a Sith might have been justification to elicit a conflicted response. Also, for some reason the fact that it was Revan, the paragon of light Jedi, who rescued her in the past and then fell to the dark side sometime later, doesn't raise any red flags to Juhani that the same could happen now again. Honestly, this probably would have been better served with Malak being the one to rescue Juhani rather than Revan. In short, doesn't care. The droids, both HK and T3M4. HK-47 was actually built by Revan, which means that as his master he's programmed to follow you, and so in short, doesn't care. T3M4 has no personality, so because you bought and own him, he'll follow you. In short, doesn't care. Canderous. Canderous being a Mandalorian who was beaten by Revan in the Mandalorian Wars, and part of the few that weren't slaughtered, might raise an interesting response. One could see how you being the guy responsible for beating his race and completely stripping their culture of their identity might cause some animosity. Ultimately, however, Revan is the only person Canderous respects, as he was the only person good enough to beat the Mandalorians. Never mind the hundreds of other Jedi who fought alongside him, no, it was all just Revan. In short, doesn't care. Actually kinda likes it. Honestly, I kinda like Canderous' viewpoint here, coming from the person who should despise you most, but it is tarnished by being the same opinion as everyone else. Bastila is currently being tortured, and Carth, well, Carth. Upon learning the secret, not from a trusted ally in Bastila, but rather from Darth Malak himself, Carth is understandably not happy. Carth has an added reason to not like this revelation, as then war hero Revan surprise attacked Telos, killing Carth's wife and presumably son in the process, as well as eradicating the planet's habitability. But no, as Canderous points out, that was all Malak's orders. Whew, good thing that wasn't Revan. That might actually have been something interesting for once. So despite the fact that you may or may not be a great deceiver, or the fact that the only thing stopping you from reverting to a genocidal tyrant is vague mysticism, Carth is the only person who cares, and only concedes when it's clear no one else gives a crap. What's the point of being the ultimate evil then? I had the twist spoiled for me before playing, because, well, the internet exists. But the sad truth is it is largely irrelevant. The twist has no substance. It might have the shock value of a tsunami, but has the impact of a droplet. Maybe the fact that almost all your companions stand by you unflinchingly would have been endearing had they considered the impact that you were Space Hitler before considering your actions demonstrate you couldn't possibly be him anymore. Highlighting that they at least know the risk and aren't just negligently being moronic. By the way, if you are evil and have been the entire game, their reactions don't change. Idiots. It's not like you're hiding your evilness, especially with a lack of skincare planning like that. Instead of this being a defining moment for your companions, it's apathy, and in the case of a dark side playthrough, apathy is death. They should have at least come up with a contingency plan, especially if you went for the dark side option. The reveal also doesn't change the story. We were already going to stop Malak. This past history doesn't change the dynamic, everything's the same. Another note, because I'm a ruler of fun, but why is Revan so widely liked? I've seen him top polls numerous times as favourite Sith character, despite the fact he's boring as shit in KOTOR. Revan comes in two forms in KOTOR, before the events of KOTOR, and as our playable character during the events. Let's look at the before. The Darth Revan. It blows my mind that Star Wars fans hate the character of Rey, when so many love Darth Revan. the actual Star Wars Mary Sue. Let's look at Darth Revan's canon, I'm using canon loosely because obviously it's Legends, resume. Revan is one of the top lightsaber duelists of the Order, beats Mandalore the Ultimate in one-on-one combat, is also one of the most potent Force users in the Order, accelerates in learning far quicker than any other Padawan, is also a military genius in combat, both tactically in battle and strategically for the larger war itself. Canderous cites him as the one reason the Mandalorians lost, not Saul or Malak, Revan. Silver-tongued, able to convince Jedi in the Mandalorian Wars to save the Republic, and then convince those very Jedi to commit war crimes and other horrors to that same Republic. Is also a political genius, ran not just one but effectively 2 empires/factions. Fluent in a wide variety of languages, an amazing mechanic, constructs arguably the single deadliest assassin droid in the Star Wars mythos, is a skilled pilot and the swoop-bite champion, isn't actually seduced by the dark side but rather sees it as a sacrifice to handle the true Sith Empire. There's actually good writing and quite compelling, about the only thing I inherently find interesting about Darth Revan. So naturally this writing comes from KOTOR 2, because that game actually knows how to write. Darth Revan is also perhaps the biggest Star Wars philosopher. He is 95% responsible for the rule of 2. Darth Bane basically just read his holocron and went, ooh, I should write that down. Darth Bane doesn't even know how it will functionally lead to a Sith victory. Actually, come to think of it, Darth Revan has some cool writing points, but they mostly don't come from the writing of KOTOR. Doubly so as Darth Revan is the silent character on account of the plot twist and displays no personality in-game despite the fact he should be happy considering how much everyone's sucking his dick. Unfortunately, Revan's abundance of skills basically leaves our character's growth meaningless. Our character's in-game accomplishments, ranging from defeating notorious bounty hunter Calo Nord and assistant to the regional Sith Lord Darth Bandon, are now no longer accomplishing growth of a Padawan to knighthood, but rather a run back to a Sith Lord's grudge match. In popular culture, Superman has often been viewed as a boring character because his abilities allow him to resolve any conflict. The trick with writing such characters isn't are they going to resolve the conflict, but rather how are they going to resolve it? Are they going to find the way to resolve it correctly? Superman vs. the Elite Four, Red Sun Superman, and All-Star Superman are all prime stories of this. Revan does not have to navigate the conflict because no such dynamic exists in KOTOR. Either stop evil or become it. But you can never cross over these choices because the morality system encourages you to follow one pathway only. Malak didn't even beat Revan the first time and was still his protege at the time of his usurping. Revan commits the cardinal sin of any prominent character. He is just boring. Revan's lack of development though could be forgiven if Revan is instead a fun character to follow regardless. Ferris Bueller might not undergo any growth on his legendary day off, but he is both fun to watch and encourages growth in others. Alright, well what about the Revan we play in-game? You know, your character. Shit. One of the blandest characters you will ever play. Silent protagonists are more interesting. As aforementioned, the way the dialogue is written leaves you either biblical study Jesus Christ or a moral sadist. Ironic how the community's nickname for KOTOR 2's protagonist is Space Jesus when Revan is the embodiment of an all-powerful messiah. Oh, and you don't play as a Sith, mind you. No, you go actively out of your way to inconvenience yourself to make other people's days worse. Admittedly, that shouldn't be a surprise. You are playing as the single biggest losers in the Star Wars universe, anti-retirers that believe you should work until you drop dead, and evidently still haven't learnt what a skincare routine is after at least 4,000 years. Consider the following excerpt from KOTOR 2.
What a surprise. Just so you Jedi know, the whole cryptic routine isn't mysterious, it's just irritating. If you really can see the future, you should be at the Pazak table. What was that, some kind of joke? That's what I'm talking about. Jedi talk. You two should start your own little Jedi Academy. Alright, cut it out. I get it. Last Jedi in the galaxy, I get the comedian who runs around in her underwear. Not that I'm complaining, mind.
In 2 lines, the playable character from the sequel is already more likable and enjoyable than Revan from the entirety of the first game. 2 lines! The only time the game lets you banter and KOTOR is against Bastila, and her relationship decreases with you as a result. I was terrified of picking this exchange because going on how characters act in the first game, I thought Atom would be offended by my teasing. It's like going to your friend's house and seeing them joking with their families, and you're waiting for one of their parents to just get the belt. But they don't, because it's a loving family. KOTOR has conditioned me like an abusive relationship. Having a horrible written protagonist isn't inherently a bad thing. Many franchises tend to have side characters more interesting than their leads. But when you spend as much of your game's time focused on praising your protagonist, you should bother to allocate some time to make sure they're actually written well. Having replayed this game for footage to use, the first standout personality moment of Revan in this game is his strategy as presented in the Kashyyyk computer of Darth Revan. HK calling Malak the original meatbag and Darth Revan finding it funny is admittedly another great Revan moment. Honestly, why could we have not just played Darth Revan's story of finding the Star Forge in the first place? I've enjoyed a silent character more than their current interpretation I've spent 30 to 40 hours with. Or why not any of your companions instead? I have just spent one of the last segments slandering most of them, but with the sole exception of T3, any of them would be a better candidate for the story. No, that does not mean good, just regardless of how poor some of your companions are written, yours is still written worse. Revan is horribly written. So our protagonist sucks, but what good is a hero without a villain? Well, unless you go dark side, then I guess you're a villain too. So how good are the antagonists? The villains, or the 4 major ones, are as follows: Calo Nord, Darth Bandon, Saul Karath, and Darth Malak. Firstly, Calo Nord. You first meet Calo Nord on Taris in an admittedly really well done entrance scene where he gets harassed by a couple of fans, counts up to 3, and then flashbangs and kills them. You can then speak to him before he leaves, and regardless what you say, he will start counting up to 3. Clever writing. He'll even insta-kill you if he finishes his countdown, or count up, I suppose. Unfortunately, he really doesn't have any good line deliveries outside of this, or any other good moments to be fair. Later, he'll talk about hunting you as though you're the only one that ever got away, which has the potential to be a badass line, but delivers the line so blandly. He reappears at Davik Kang's estate, where you can see the trophies he collects as part of his poaching, including details how he killed the big game itself, the Rancor, by feeding it explosives and then jumping on it to shoot it. This is further used as a way to establish how dangerous Calo Nord is, while also potentially vilifying him by establishing him as a poacher. Side note, however, admittedly this might just be me, but poachers are kinda pathetic. Using high caliber weaponry and explosives isn't that impressive, like using an RPG to kill an elephant. Just kinda makes you a dickhead. Other points to mention is he grew up killing the bounty hunters that came after his head, and he commissioned Mandalorian-esque armor because cosplay is very intimidating, and killed the armorer so the armor was one of a kind, and also so he didn't have to pay him. Yeah, so much for professionalism, I guess. He also functions as part of a boss fight alongside Davik, until he scores a ring out by debris after rather pathetically threatening to suicide bomb everyone in the hangar. Lol. Surviving his ordeal and the destruction of Taris somehow, Calo Nord is hired to find and kill you by Darth Malak after he tells Malak the big revelation. As such, he will appear flanked by bodyguards on the first of the 4 planets you progress through: Tatooine, Kashyyyk, Manaan, or Korriban. The first major issue Calo Nord has is that his difficulty depends on which planet you face him. On Tatooine, the canonical planet, he has Rodian mercenaries that are easy enough to deal with. Same goes for if you face him on Manaan, flanked by 2 mercenaries. If you face him on Kashyyyk or Korriban, however, the damage sponge Wookiees or Sith bodyguards will be quite a sudden step up in difficulty. Those Wookiees slaughtered me on my first playthrough. The second issue is Calo Nord's drip, or lack thereof. Petty to complain about, I know, but I still will anyway. Calo Nord dresses up like Dengar's middle-aged best friend Bachelor. It's hard to find him intimidating when he looks and sounds so goddamn lame. He also looks like he's exclusively dressed for Tatooine. In short, Calo started off written well, but is designed poorly. Second up is Darth Bandon. Okay, who decided to name a Sith Darth Brandon? Seriously? Darth Bandon is the apprentice of Darth Malak, and first appears in the tutorial aboard the Ebon Hawk as a Sith Trask Olgo faces. Despite this, I didn't realise this until Wikipedia pointed out, as Darth Bandon has such a generically forgettable design. The only other thing Darth Bandon has going for him is his introductory scene, where Malak dispatches him to deal with you and he force pushes some worker into a console to break it as a test of his might. Regardless, Darth Bandon never has a chance to feel threatening, even if he now seems like a dick. Actually, his juvenile outburst actually makes him seem less threatening, as we now see he's a thundering dumbass. We meet him flanked by bodyguards on the third of the 4 planets to choose from, Tatooine, Kashyyyk, Manaan, or Korriban. He isn't difficult at this point in the campaign. Honestly, I don't know why he exists. He's just kinda pathetic and contributes basically nothing. Side note, the fact that Calo and Darth Bandon have an additional line to explain their presence on Manaan, and the fact it differs from one another is a nice touch, but overall, Darth Bandon stinks. Thirdly is Saul Karath. Nothing but praise. His villainy tying into Carth's backstory as a personal grudge of betrayal is quite nice. He is also the only competent member of the Sith Empire. Side note before I move on though, he's noticeably evil upon joining the Sith faction, despite the fact he shouldn't be susceptible to the dark side, on account of not being force sensitive. So they could have done something with that angle, but I think it's still fine regardless. And lastly, the Dark Lord himself, Darth Malak. Oh god, where to begin with this loser. After every preceding character, I didn't think the barrel could scrape any lower. Let's start with the complete failure of this character. Before becoming a Sith Lord, Malak was complete besties with Revan. He's mentioned as doing all the same things as Revan, including joining the Mandalorian Wars, finding the star maps, and turning against the Republic. However, most of the time these events get mentioned, it's with respect to Revan. Canderous, for instance, doesn't acknowledge Malak's place in the Mandalorian Wars, despite the fact it would give him the perfect motivation to fight Darth Malak. Heck, the only time Canderous mentions Malak is to justify to Carth that Revan is greater than he gives him credit for. All throughout the story, Malak sucks. There's not a single good scene of him this entire game. That's impressive. The first major thing he does following the capture of Taris is to destroy Taris to prevent the Republic from reacquiring Bastila following the destruction of the Endar Spire. This is to depict Malak as a villain, genociding an entire planet to try and stop just one person. This should also have emotional stakes to you, as every side quest on Taris that you did to improve someone's lives, or quest you made to make new friends, well now they're all dead. All your effort eradicated by the big bad. Unfortunately, more than highlighting Malak's evil, it demonstrates the Sith Lord's stupidity. Malak, you own the planet, and you had your forces there when you bombed it. What do you think this would do to your public relations throughout the galaxy? Yes, I understand the Sith are evil, but surely some of the planets decimated by the Mandalorians joined the Sith forces as a repayment. Does Malak expect that planets he's trying to control are going to be comfortable with a spontaneous genocide? Similar story with the recruitable population on Manaan. The Sith are trying to hire mercenaries and argue Taris says like don't stand in our way. And it works on the one person they tried on? What? Like if I told you to join me, oh and by the way we might one day spontaneously decide to genocide your home planet, or the one you're stationed on without evacuating it first, I'm pretty sure all I've done is a great job encouraging you to join the opposition. Additionally, the Sith colony on Korriban Yavin was relying on trade routes that went through Taris. Your Sith Academy and religiously significant location relied on the planet and you blew it up, you maniacs! Oh, and the best part? It fails to kill that one person. Good job! While on the topic of Malak being an idiot, why does Malak not simply destroy the star maps when it becomes obvious you're tracking them? Not only do random Sith find you on each planet, including the barren wasteland and strategically irrelevant Tatooine, as well as Calo and Darth Bandon, but even Saul Karath intercepts you in space. At some point Malak must know you're heading to the planets with star maps, so why not station a battalion there, or just ring someone up on the surface to blow it up? Hell, Malak should have plenty of time to do it himself. There are so many ways to easily stop your quest to find the Star Forge. Are they even hunting you? The only planet it might make sense not to change anything is Korriban, which admittedly is the canonical last planet, as there is a Sith Academy guarding it, but he could still order someone to seal off the tomb it's present in, or stick up wanted posters of your main character all over the Academy. The Starforge seems to be the Sith faction's near-exclusive means of production for their entire military. Its location is sensitive information that they cannot risk losing to the Republic, as they'd likely launch a full-scale offensive on it, as what happens in the game. Which is exactly what happens, mind you, because Malak might be the least competent being in the galaxy. Despite being present in quite a few scenes featuring Calo, Nord, Darth Bandon, Saul, Karath, that one is threatening to dispatch the only competent person in the Empire, mind you, and torturing Bastila, I do like the fact he uses the word wet. The focus basically is always on the other character, which I guess makes sense as you face each of these characters before Malak, but Malak never really steals these scenes. Something's always going on, and he lacks that commanding presence like other Star Wars villains of Jarek or the Second Sister. And even as the big bad Sith Lord, he still feels like just a background character. Malak really only has two other impactful scenes. The first is his presence on the Leviathan, and the second is the one on the Starforge where his jaw is missing. The showdown on the Leviathan shows about half his personality, but is overshadowed by the revelation, and Carth's, and I'm not quite sure if this was supposed to be humorous, down you go! Pew pew. The scene where his jaw is missing was kinda cool, but not so much because of Malak, but rather because whoever animated the Admiral's reaction, well done to that animator, very colourful. In gameplay, Malak also sucks, design-wise. The first time we face him is on board the Leviathan after finding the third star map. You're required to beat him by yourself before Bastila sacrifices herself in a cutscene to allow you to escape. In theory, the boss fight here is a nice inclusion, as you will have to duel Darth Malak as the final boss by yourself. In practice, it sucks. Assuming you've done the canonical planet order, Tatooine, Kashyyyk, and Manaan by this point, the only time you've been required to fight solo has been the optional dual ring on Taris and as a companion on the Leviathan. Ergo, I'd spent the entire game speccing my character to fight efficiently alongside teammates. What this means going into this fight was I struggled as my character had been designed for group healing and AoE stuns that Malak was immune to. Now, there's also was no evidence that the final boss was going to be another solo experience, on account of having other companions for 97% of the game as an integral feature, so I didn't try to compensate for my difficulty with this fight, but it wouldn't have mattered even if I did. Why? Because assuming you've done every quest like I have up to this point, you're level 17, and the game has a hard-coded level limit of 20, meaning I would be expected to overhaul my character's combat priorities with a measly 3 remaining levels. Unsurprisingly, this makes a final fight where is stronger even more challenging. Facing waves of grunt with your companions present the entire game means that Darth Malak as a solo encounter is something that you were not prepared for, nor encouraged to consider. BioWare really did not think this through. When Darth Malak gets low on health in the final encounter, he will steal life force from Jedi in destroyable stasis pods, prolonging this fight. Worse is that you can only destroy these pods if you have the appropriate force power. I believe it is lightsaber throw, destroy droid, force choke, or drain life, meaning it's entirely reasonable that you will get to use all pods due to your lack of force powers, which if you're light side is probably an expectation because lightsaber throw and destroy droid aren't god tier. So yeah, that's great. A tip if you are struggling though is that an oversight means you can activate all your battle sims from the menu without wasting any rounds of combat. That's actually not even the worst part of this encounter. The part after you win, Darth Malak's death. It's not often Sith get any final words. Of the 9 main Star Wars movies we have today, only Darth Vader got final words. I was really looking forward to what Darth Malak would say as his final statement. Would it be an apology and a redemption to the light? Would he stay committed to the dark side even in death? Would he speak about his triumphs in the Mandalorian Wars? Would he look back on his life fondly, or think about all the horrors of the war he's experienced or committed? Would he talk about the things he's seen you wouldn't believe? Is he happy or sad that you're the last face he sees after you've gone from best friends to overshadowing him and mutilating his jaw? There are so many interesting or emotional directions they could have gone here. So many possibilities to make Malak a great character from just his final scene. So what did they pick? Of course. I get the idea of Malak's character was that he lived in Relic Shadow, but are you kidding me? This is your death, Darth Malak. So make it about you. Why are you throwing Revan on a pedestal? Everyone else has been blowing Revan the entire game. Why are you joining in? Even in death, Malak is completely pathetic, and it's a darn shame, because even his final conversation of acceptance could have worked if he relayed it to himself. But he spends the entire conversation praising Revan. No talk of what Malak's destiny was, but oh, you better be sure we'll talk about Revan's destiny. Now, I was just rambling about levels, so let's take a look at the flaws of the leveling system. You start your character creation by picking one of 3 classes: Soldier, Scout, and Scoundrel. To simplify, Soldier is combat focused with the most feat progressions per level. Scoundrel has the most skill points per level. Scout's in the middle of the other 2. In Character Create, your character gets their first level, with the second forced level up aboard the Endar Spire. Make a note of this point. You play as one of these classes until you get to an earlier point in Dantooine, where you get to pick one of 3 Jedi classes: Guardian, Consular, and Sentinel. The Jedi classes are largely a mirror. Guardian is Soldier, Consular is Scout, and lastly, Sentinel is Scoundrel. The notable highlight being that every 4 levels the Consular gets a second force power upgrade instead of the usual 1. Except the first level of any Jedi class, each receives 2 powers then. By the first time you arrive on Dantooine, having done all optional quests and fights, you should be level 8. You instantly gain another level upon picking your Jedi class. Thus, out of your 20 levels, 12 are expected to be Jedi, barely over half your levels, which is kind of disappointing when being a Jedi class is more fun than a regular one. Moreover, the large inconvenience is a lack of force powers for your pool. In short, you don't have enough force powers, and as such resources are restrictive. Let's take a look at what I've considered the reasonable necessities. Having spent the first half of the game without a recharging heal and constantly running low or out of medpacks, it makes sense that Force Cure is a reasonable necessity for all your and your party's healing requirements. Although its upgrades and heal is most likely not worth a power slot, it's unclear how much you'll face poison in the campaign at any moment if you haven't played already. And to be honest, it's good against Sith using Force Plague, and the extra healing can be nice to save time between combat rounds. Secondly, as well as your free healing source, by facing groups of enemies as half of your encounters, you're encouraged to pursue an area of effect force power, probably 2 if we're being honest. For light side and adjacent, you have the choices between Force Stasis Field and Force Wave. Force Stasis, as one can probably guess, stuns the opponents, either freezing them in place and becoming free hits to sneak attack, or inflicting them with slow that weakens them. Wave, by contrast, pushes all enemies close to your way, dealing damage and likely stunning them for a shorter duration than Stasis to be expected. I can see a Force Wave a necessity for any Sans Lightning playthrough, while Stasis can largely be subsidized by spamming Force Wave 4 times in a row. I would hardly consider it a waste of a force power, and still incredibly powerful. For Darkside on the other hand, you have the choice of Force Storm and Death Field. Chances are you're going to go for both. I mean, Force Storm is the area of effect attack that does the highest damage. Technically, one can make the argument to include Force Wave as an alternative, as it pushes enemies out of immediate melee range and can stun them, but who needs stun when you can spam out enough damage to kill them that much faster? Also, on account of doing electrical damage, Force Storm annihilates droids. If you do take damage from organic enemies while hurling onslaughts of lightning at all your enemies that take slightly longer to kill, feel free to steal the rest of their happiness and liveliness with Death Field, healing yourself for all the damage you just took. I mean, both of these powers unlock at level 18, sound awesome in premise and functionality, and are some of the most iconic Sith abilities in Star Wars mythos. However, on account of Death Field being a level 18 unlock, you'll still require at least Force Cure as a heal, as Drain Life both doesn't heal much, only feeding off one enemy, and can't heal party companions anyway. The third sort of point to highlight is, as a near universal rule of an RPG genre, is usually wise to have access to a high level of persuasion. A staple of RPGs is not letting the player get the maximum rewards or the best endings for quests unless you have a high persuasion stat, which means Dominate Mind seems very appealingly. Unfortunately, without having played the game before you would have no idea how necessary or unnecessary Dominate Mind is. The other force power is Force Valor, which also gives a buff to Persuasion, as well as other skills and attributes, making it the superior force power and won't risk acquiring dark side points for using, unlike Dominant Mind can. Although Force Valor is a tier 3 force power, so will require more investment. And lastly, by far the single most important force power of them all, Force Speed. Seriously, who made this so overpowered? Maxing out Force Speed to all 3 tiers will give you an additional 2 strikes in each round of combat for absolutely free, doubling or tripling your weapon's damage output at almost no cost, with a defense boost, making it the second best force power in single combat in the franchise, behind only the completely broken Force Crush in KOTOR 2, and technically Force Alignment, but that's because it activates Force Speed. Far more important than all of this though, and not stated on the Force Power Select, is that Force Speed increases your character's speed on the overworld while it's active, protecting your sanity from long stretches of monotonous running. Well, I would have killed to have this on Taris, and in my specific case, Tatooine as well. Couple that with quick saving and quick loading, and become the tachyon you were meant to be. Absolutely mandatory. Not that you'll know it. By count, this is exactly 13. 11 if Drain, 1 less for Drain, 1 less for Heal, plus 1 more if you went Valor instead of Dominate Mind. Consider you reach level 8 by Dantooine, and thus have Jedi levels from 9 to 20 inclusive. This gives you access to exactly 13 force powers you get to on your first level if you are Guardian or Sentinel, and 15 if you're Consular. Alright, I just listed 13 required force powers. So how does this game handle when you're new to the game? Well, on my first playthrough, when I didn't know the game, I chose these 13 powers. I chose Cure plus Heal, that makes 2. I chose all 3 levels of Force Stun. I chose all 3 levels of Force Whirlwind. A side note here, but the second stage Force Whirlwind is actually a pretty good option for bosses / single opponents, but you can't access it once you have Force Wave. The reason it's good is because it's quite good at stunning them. I got Stun Droid at level 1. While not necessary, Stun Droid can basically get through any droid by immobilizing it. It wouldn't be bad to get more levels of this, but I just didn't have the level capacity to afford it. I got Force Breach 2, getting ready to go to Korriban in the future, where I expected to fight a bunch of Sith, as well as the bosses of Darth, Bandon and Lord Malak. This seemed like a useful choice. Fun fact for you about the Sith you face. The no-names only have Burst of Speed, and Malak and Bandon only have Force Immunity. The roaming Sith that say Lord Malak will be most displeased can have Force Resistance, whereas the Sith on the Starforge will have some variation of either Speed, Shield, or Resistance, but not all 3. Bastila has Force Immunity in her boss fight. So yeah, now I'm an idiot for not predicting that enemies wouldn't use more buffs. There's no real reason for this force power to exist because no enemies use enough things to justify it. The final force power I got was Lightsaber Throw at level 2, so the advanced one. With only 2 more force powers to acquire, I figured I'd go with Lightsaber Throw. I couldn't afford any 3-tier force powers at this stage, and I fully upgraded a Lightsaber Throw could probably be useful going off other Star Wars media, including Battlefront 2, Jedi Outcast, Darth Vader versing Luke. I also didn't feel like I needed anything specific as I covered all the bases for support with my party. I had healing, I had crowd control with debuffs for grunts, and now with Force Breach and anti-boss force power. So now me and my party will be able to handle anything the final boss could throw at us. Oh yeah, that's right, the party isn't present. Whoops. Adds up would have been nice earlier in the game. As well as that, Force Breach obviously wasn't particularly useful in that final encounter. Having used all 13 force powers I could acquire, this means I missed out on Dominate Mind 2, or Force Valor 3, as well as Force Speed 3. Ultimately, the issue with the force powers in this game isn't tied to the quality of the force powers, but rather the quantity of them. In other words, there are too few levels for your main character. Other Jedi in your party will have plenty of force power allocations to try out the others. Let's face it, unnecessary force powers. Ironically, by giving them more options for force powers, they ended up having more combat powers and were encouraged to be my powerhouses, with my character supporting them, and yet I couldn't bring them to the final 2 boss fights and had to do them myself. There are 2 workarounds, however, both revolving around not getting to level 8. Well, sort of. The first possibility is to not do any side quests on Taris. This will leave your character I think at level 5, maybe even level 4. I actually don't know the answer because generally speaking, I don't like skipping content. What makes this funny is that by having less levels as a beginner class, you can have more levels as a Jedi class, having more force powers making not only the game more fun, but easier too. Let that sink in. This is the only game I can think of, minus a niche quest in Deus Ex Human Revolution, that penalizes you for doing more side quests. What a weird distinction. Actually kind of wild. The other workaround is kind of funny. Remember how I said to make a note about the fact there was a mandatory level on the Endar Spire? What a lot of players will unironically recommend, and I've done it too, is to hoard all your levels by not spending any levels all throughout Taris until you unlock a Jedi class on Dantooine. Then your Jedi class starts at 3, and you get more force powers to play with. Let that sink in. Play the first third of the game noticeably more difficult so you can have more fun for the remainder of the game. People recommend this. Obviously, very beginner unfriendly doing this method. So we have two questionable methods to get a better quantity of force powers, but neither one is ideal. Especially for a first time playthrough, but even on subsequent playthroughs, it's still kind of ridiculous that this is what we resort to. So for the most part, I've criticised the mechanics and characters of the game. But what about the bulk of the game itself, the planets and locations you visit on your quest? Taris, Dantooine, Tatooine, Kashyyyk, although this game pronounces it Kashyyyk, like a Mongolian horse archer, the Kashyyyk, though admittedly the pronunciation could be much worse. The holiday special calls it Kashyyyk. I don't even know how it got that. There's also Manaan, the Leviathan, Korriban, Rakatta Prime, and the Starforge. So this may take a while to get through. After escaping the Endar Spire during the tutorial, after the Sith decides to do some colourful renovations, you begin your journey on Taris. Taris. Alright, before we begin, I'm going to go on a little writing tangent. When Carth talks about his past, he mentions the planet of Telos that Revan and Malak attacked. Note for aspiring writers. The name Taris vaguely sounds like Telos, both the two-syllable, 5-layer words with the same start and end letter. And considering both planets get destroyed by the Sith, and are mentioned in passing instead of being more prominent, I personally confused them quite a few times when one was brought up. This could be a me problem, but still, if you are writing a story, don't name 3 of the characters same names, like say Michael, Mitchell, and Miguel. This could have also applied to Tatooine and Dantooine, but both of these planets were first named in New Hope, so it wouldn't be KOTOR's fault. And also, everyone and their mum is familiar with Tatooine, so you wouldn't mistake it in Dantooine. Not being familiar with either Taris or Telos can cause this confusion. Alright, rant over. Taris is the first planet of the game, and feels like it takes up a third. While that's probably not true, Taris is noticeably the biggest singular planet in the entire duology, and seems like it has the most things to do, i.e. quests. Let's start with the looks. Taris looks wonderful, with plenty of lovely architecture and variety for the different levels present. It kind of looks and feels like Coruscant, but still uniquely Taris. It's kind of a shame no other planets will feel this fleshed out. The planet will see you hang around the rich upper levels, including apartments, an embassy and a dueling ring, a lower level with cantinas, sewers, swoop bike racing and a gang hideout, and an even lower level with slums and a zombie-esque infestation, before ending in the crime lord's estate. Also of note is that in Taris we acquire 6 of our 8 permanent companions: Carth, Mission Val, Zaalbar, Bastila, T3M4, and Canderous. Taris is huge. Playing it feels like an epic, and this is a problem a lot of players have with it. The fact that it is so long which can slow down your desire to replay. It can feel even longer considering KOTOR 1 and 2 don't contain a New Game Plus mode. It can also bore you before the game opens up starting from Dantooine. Cough cough, the part where you become a Jedi. You know, the fun part of the game. Actually, if you had Force Speed, I don't think Taris would feel quite so long. Obviously for the purposes of the story we can't have Force powers, but Nar Shaddaa in KOTOR 2 introduced a speeder that once you refurbish could fast travel you to any of the sections of the planet, which would have been perfect for Taris. It wasn't useful on Nar Shaddaa specifically, as you should already have had Force Speed by this time, and also by the time you complete it, you get it for all about 5 minutes before it's permanently sabotaged as your infamy reaches the next level in the story progression. The reality is that Taris is the best planet across the 2 games. I think one of the major reasons is it's described as too long is because in many ways Taris feels like a different game, its own game. It's actually kind of a fun game. Dantooine. Dantooine's quite alright. Not only do we gain access to our Jedi class, we get to experience a Jedi Academy. This could be more fleshed out for my liking, but it's still nice what we sort of get. We solve a murder mystery and have fun side quests like killing Mandalorian raiders led by the aforementioned Kashyyyk, a Romeo and Juliet ripoff that actually isn't that great, but does have many endings going for it, and my personal favourite is a story about a woman overly attached to a droid. It also has Juhani's quest, which is a plus minus. Dantooine to me highlights the main weakness with KOTOR's story though. Not every NPC is likeable, but in those moments it doesn't matter because the main characters should be there to step up and be fun to watch. Which they just aren't. This is reoccurring for many quests. If the quest can't stand on its own might and requires your characters to make it engaging, it doesn't tend to work out. This problem makes Dantooine as a location neat, but not great. A very glass half empty, half full. It does still have other negatives present, such as the design of the star map robots. The robots guarding the star maps have resistance to energy weapons, such as blasters and lightsabers. You know, the weapon type you just unlocked. They're relatively vulnerable to vibroblades, but nowhere does the game actually tell you that they are energy resistant. You never make the connection, making this encounter much harder than it should have been. Another negative is the pitiful destruction of Dantooine once you reach the Leviathan. It comes off as basically an afterthought. Yeah, we destroyed it so you can't go back. Meaning you never get the chance to talk to the Jedi Council about that whole Jedi brainwashing thing. Thank goodness, that might have been interesting. As a build-up to confronting the Starforge, I think a return to Dantooine could have replaced Rakatta Prime in the same way that Telos functions in its sequel. Having Dantooine destroyed before our eyes with us experiencing it before we head off to take out the Starforge could have raised the stakes further. A similar thing happened in A New Hope, where it wasn't actually planned that the Death Star would destroy Yavin 4. The original script just had the rebels basically taking on the Death Star just in space, but Lucas's ex-wife had suggested that, oh hey, why don't we actually make it so that we have some stakes? Hence they added the imminent destruction of Yavin 4 as a threat for our rebels to work against. Moving on, after having found the first of the 5 star maps, it's at this point the game opens up and lets us take the following planets in any order we wish: Tatooine, Kashyyyk, Manaan, and Korriban. I mention the planets in this order because this is the canonical order. If you, however, listen to Master Yoda ripoff, Vander Torkar, who swaps the order of Kashyyyk and Tatooine, this means you'll face Calo Nord on the more inconvenient Kashyyyk. And imagine being the idiot that did Kashyyyk first. First of the 4, Tatooine. Tatooine is a barren, deserted wasteland with almost no built-up infrastructure and limited variation. Still, I don't need to explain Tatooine. Star Wars media beats us over the head with it enough anyway, which is particularly odd considering Tatooine's role in the first movie, A New Hope. In Star Wars Episode 4, Tatooine is the planet we start protagonist Luke Skywalker's journey on. The only real action we experience of Tatooine in the movie is that of the shady Mos Eisley Cantina. Tatooine is otherwise portrayed as a barren, plain, and flat planet. We see Luke stare off into the distance at the horizon, suggesting his desire to explore the galaxy and do something greater. The only jobs we're presented with are moisture farmers, bartenders, fencers, and pilots. It's supposed to feel small and underdeveloped. The point of Tatooine's adventure is for Kenobi escaping it, twice. Luke also leaves when his only tethers, his uncle and aunt, are unceremoniously executed, highlighting how small this planet really is and why it probably shouldn't be reused. Reusing it, however, isn't necessarily a horrible decision, as it is used quite effectively in the prequel trilogy to illustrate Luke and Anakin's differences and similarities. In Return of the Jedi, it's likely there's a way to tie Han Solo back to Tatooine, and because the environments are bare basic in the original trilogy, as CG effects weren't really a thing until the prequels, something the prequels rightly capitalized on this upgrade, the Book of Boba Fett has Tatooine as its main setting. The sequel trilogy has Rey and The Force Awakens begin on Jakku, which serves the same function of being a barren wasteland to escape as Tatooine did in its counterpart, A New Hope. Crate in The Last Jedi serves as the same function as Hoth, being a presumably cold planet that is covered in a white material and serves as an under-equipped last stand of the rebels where they use not combat machinery against robot camels, and the Empire fails to capture the rebel leadership, and lastly in Rise of Skywalker, we don't even try to hide it as it is literally just Endor, same as Return of the Jedi. Although despite it reusing another location, it actually admittedly does have a reason to, even if it's stupid. The point being, if you haven't got anything new or clever to say about a location in the original trilogy, you probably shouldn't use such plans, as not even their base designs are all that interesting, and they can't carry any weak writing, of which KOTOR demonstrates pretty consistently. Tatooine is not a planet designed for adventure. So it seems like Tatooine would be an empty location and generally quite boring. You betcha! There are 5 overworld locations on this planet: the Docking Bay, Anchorhead, the Dune Sea, the Sand People Territory, and the Eastern Dune Sea. Of these locations, Anchorhead is about the only one with more than one thing going on. While that's not technically true, I'll break down each of these locations to show you what I mean. Docking Bay understandably has not much past paying/not paying a docking fee and getting laden with some gizka that you can't get the dock workers to return, probably because the Ebonhawk's insurance is still in Davik's name. Anchorhead has the Hunting Lodge, Zerka office, Swoop registration, cantina, and a droid shop, despite being one of the smallest overworld locations, in contrast to the largest 3 overworld locations on Tatooine, that all feel too sparse. The Dune Sea has 2 marked out locations and a handful of other small encounters. The first of these 2 locations is a sandcrawler with miners who are ambushed by Tusken raiders. That's really the extent of this encounter, although said miners will attack you if any of your party are dressed like a Tusken, which kind of leads me to believe that the sandcrawler was a way to have the Dune scene seem more visually appealing. I suppose it also reinforces the backstory about miners and Zerka getting attacked by sand people, but without any deep, interesting, or fun add to this encounter, it feels quite stale. The other location is an accident between speeder bikes where 3 Gamorreans try to extort you, that while small is a neat encounter. The only other side quest section is a husband who is trapped by a vengeful wife between 4 droids, and if he moves, he blows up. Other than that, the only thing inhabiting the vast deserts of the Dune Seas are packs of raids and 5 small ambushes from sand people. Only one encounter here doesn't reasonably involve combat. Another overworld location is a sand people territory that has scattered mines, 4 more small ambushes by Tuskens, and a patrol of 6 more Tuskens with 3 Banthas strolling around, and lastly an insta-kill gate. The insta-kill gate can be passed by committing what I think is a false flags attack. I mean, it's not like the game encouraged and rewarded me with juicy XP for killing 37 Tusken Raiders. After entering it, you are immediately turned back by a guard if you don't have HK-47 from the droid store in Anchorhead in your party to act as a translator. If you then re-enter without HK, you have to start blasting. A violent solution won't net you any dark side points despite killing up to 29 if Griff exists, additional sand people. This is especially funny because you can aggro them by stealing right in front of their faces, and still this isn't immoral. The only thing inside worth mentioning are the Chieftain, Jawa captors, and a storyteller. The Chieftain can show you the way to the Eastern Dune Sea, but wants moisturizer converters back in Anchorhead so he can move his, presumably now dwindling tribe, to a new location. The Jawas are an alternative way to find the Eastern Dune Sea, and lastly, the storyteller is a little bit of a lore dump after you've found the star map. The Eastern Dune Sea, by contrast, has even less going for it than the last 2 locations, with one forced combat encounter where you kill another 4 Tusken Raiders by defiling sacred creatures, and a potential encounter with Calo Nord or Darth Bandon after reading the star map. Oh, and although you've probably picked up Bantha fodder by now, if you haven't, the game tells you to buy some at Anchorhead. Regardless, after the star map, we're free to leave Tatooine. The 3 major destinations are Anchorhead, which you must visit at least twice, but potentially up to 4 times, the Sand People Enclave, which you must visit at least twice, but potentially 3 times, and the Eastern Sea Dune, which you must visit also at least once, but potentially make a second journey. This could approximately look like land on Tatooine and visit Anchorhead to access the Dune Sea, run across the Dune Sea, run across the Sand People Territory, enter Sand People Enclave, realize you don't have HK-47, run across the Sand People Territory, run across the Dune Sea, buy HK from Anchorhead, run across the Dune Sea, run across the Sand People territory, enter Sand People Enclave, realize you now need moisture converters, run across the Sand People territory, run across the Dune Sea, get moisture converters from Anchorhead, run across the Dune Sea, run across the Sand People territory, enter the Sand People Enclave, learn how to access the Eastern Dune Sea, run across the Sand People territory, run across Eastern Dune Sea. If you have not picked up any bantha fodder before now, you run across the Eastern Dune Sea, run across the Dune Sea, buy bantha fodder from Anchorhead, run across the Dune Sea, run across the Eastern Dune Sea, and then you are finally finished with Tatooine. A friendly reminder that force speed is a near requirement for 1 sanity, as it would suck if you did not have it. Between the Dune Sea, Sand People territory, and Eastern Dune Sea, there are only 2 encounters that don't result in genociding native species. And remember that all the encounters will likely be done the first time you run through an area, meaning you'll be running through empty sand dunes on subsequent transits. Now, for those of you familiar with the game, might be mentioning that on your map you can return to the Ebon Hawk to skip running back to the Anchorhead. That is true, but I will still have to run across the desert to get back to the Enclave and Crate Dragon Cave, right? I mean, once I'm in Anchorhead I can't transit back and can only warp back to the Ebon Hawk, which is even further from my destination. Well, after writing this specific part of the script, I learned that the transit back ability will remember even once you've changed locations multiple times, meaning you can warp back to the Ebon Hawk, change location to Anchorhead and whichever shop/office you need on foot, where the only visible option in this map is return to Ebon Hawk, walk back to the loading dock area, and then transit back to where you were before you warped the first time. I've played this crappy game now 4 times, including its mandatory tutorial section 4 times, and not once has it mentioned anywhere in this game that functions like this. This saves so much time on like half the planets, and it's not mentioned correctly once? Now you might be legitimately thinking, well, duh, you must be an idiot for not picking that up, and that's probably true. However, for various quests, you still have to run all over the various planets, and that doesn't fix the fact that there is far too much running for how boring it is. If running was more fun or engaging, like jumping over those small rocks for speed boost in Middle-earth Shadow of Mordor, or just strafing and jumping like most other games released since 1995, this won't be an issue, or if it took less time, but unfortunately running probably takes up 1/3 of the game. It is just boring, slow moving in straight lines. Doubly so on uninteresting backdrops like Tatooine and Kashyyyk. Another method to speed up this process is to quick save while moving, which jumps you forward, but this method will eventually lead to the game crashing, so make sure you frequently save in major locations. However, I would recommend utilizing this method as it is the only time running is actually interactive, and thus fun. And it's a glitch, of course. There's no downside to skipping traversal because there's no variation to any of Tatooine's encounters or scenery. Tatooine is a genuine waste of a planet, and this game would have been better off without it. Diverting these resources elsewhere to something that might actually be fun to experience. Tatooine would not be the only planet of nostalgia in KOTOR, as Kashyyyk also makes an appearance. Note that this game released 2 years before Revenge of the Sith though, so it's visually a closer approximation to Endor for the treetops and Dagobah for the Shadowlands. So yeah, the second of the 4 planets, Kashyyyk. Kashyyyk is long, not particularly exciting, and just kind of plain of all things considered. Now, I won't quite leave out just that, but Kashyyyk is rather forgettable, so instead I'm just going to rapid fire the issues. Number 1. Zaalbar's family feud sucks. Not only is it predictable, it's also unnecessary as a side quest already presents the same idea. Number 2. Barely interacting with Zaalbar at the only place he will voluntarily talk to you. Number 3. If you finish the main campaign of Kashyyyk before finishing a Manaan side quest, they become completely locked off, unable to be completed from then on, which is likely to happen. Number 4. The encounter with Calo Nord or Darth Bandon happens immediately after a loading transition, so you don't have any time to prepare if you have a suboptimal battle party. Number 5. You cannot fast travel back to the Ebon Hawk from most of the locations for some reason, meaning you'll probably forget to complete Manaan's quest before you lock it off permanently. Number 6. The background audio in the Shadowlands near Tax is actually really annoying. Number 7. The cool puzzle awards dark side points if you answer it accurately, meaning you can't try to figure it out if it's light side. And this last one isn't a negative, but the visuals match that of the holiday special. There's nothing wrong, I just find that funny. Nostalgia is where KOTOR is at its worst. When KOTOR tries something new, it usually ends up refreshing, like Manaan. So here is the third of the 4th planets, Manaan. Manaan is actually quite good, and a lovely addition to the franchise with both a great dynamic and a positive lore contribution. The premise behind Manaan is that the planet is home to the strongest current healing source called KOTOR, as Bacta doesn't exist yet. With a giant galactic war being performed by both juggernauts, the Republic and the Sith, Manaan has to maintain neutrality and sell equally to each of them, so they don't become a strategic target to the losing bidder. However, while the Republic and the Sith are forced to keep the peace or they'll lose access to KOTOR, both sides partake in ways designed to exceed their max limit. The Sith try to orchestrate a coup, while the Republic try to secretly mine more. The disparity between the two methods, despite striving for the same goal, is a clever way to show the difference between the mindsets of each faction. Jolee's friend trial is also great, as you have to defend a man who has so much evidence stacked against him in a murder trial, with the surprise kicker being that yes, he did kill her, hence all the evidence, and you should still be aiming to defend him. Ultimately irrelevant, as it is cut content, but Deadeye Duncan also has an interaction where, after luckily finding his way off Taris, he struggles to find work on account of his poor dueling record, so he asks you if he can take you or handle the mysterious stranger. There's also some slight survival horror vibes as you embark beneath the surface for a nice shift in ambiance. Well done, BioWare. Manaan is well written and fun to maneuver. After finding what is the 4th star map, the Yavin Hawk is captured by the Leviathan, Saul Karath's flagship. His vessel has been tracking you for some degree of time, I guess, and upon capture you'll be forced to pick one of your non-Carth/Bastila companions for a short scripted section. It's just unfortunate you can only experience 1 out of the 6 of them per complete playthrough. It is so nice to have a section dedicated to a companion of your choice. It's just a shame that other than when they first join your party, this is really the only time. Also, the spacewalk section has you run so much slower than you need to. I do like Saul's involvement in the game and the fact that he gets to have the last laugh against Carth. Lastly is the 4th of the 4 planets, Korriban. We've spent time at a Jedi Academy on Dantooine, so now we spend time at a Sith Academy, once again highlighting the differences in approach by the rival factions. The star map is in a tomb that isn't open to you until you get enough prestige by completing other tombs, infiltrating a droid camp, interrogating a prisoner, or sabotaging your fellow cadets. The number of options to approach such an outcome is great and affords you freedom in how you want to play the location. Ajuntapal's legendary sword is still ass though. It's also very easy to get everyone to fight you in the end and cause a genocide. Not like we've done that before. Tatooine. Also Kashyyyk as well, come to think of it. Plus, you have no idea how each tomb will work before entering, which is a positive. Mind you, you have an idea, but still. There's also a nice touch where 2 humans speak Twi'lek instead of Galactic Basic, which isn't relevant to anything but interesting world building I find. I will however point out that I bought T3M4 as a skill jockey, and yet both the prisoner and the assassin droid require their skills to be on my own character, meaning T3 is even more useless than I thought he was. Now that we've completed the star maps, which is kind of surprising that we need all 5 given how they're written, it's not a plot hole or anything, but like logically you'd expect to only have to find like maybe 2 before you've got enough of the map you can find the location. Anyway, we're ready to depart to find and destroy the Starforge. But first, now would be a good time to briefly mention Yavin 4, a space station in orbit above the moon with a 3-part encounter that unlocks after your first, Dantooine, 3rd and final 5th star map has been discovered, wherein you have to kill Trandoshans. It's basically just a shop that can net you a bunch of credits if you sell your Tatooine swoop bite bonds here, and allows you to buy 2 of the most powerful lightsaber crystals before the denouement occurs. Now that we've made sure we've completed everything, we can now attack the Starforge. Wait, what's happening? Yeah, before we reach our final destination, we land on Rakatta Prime, or Lehon as it's known in the Darth Bane novel. Rakatta Prime is at least a little interesting to talk about. Ships get sunk on the planet like a black hole, which adds a lovely background scenery that I personally think hasn't looked this good since Taris. Before we can get off this planet, we have to pick a side in a conflict between the same ancient alien race that built the Starforge before we have to escape the planet through an alien temple that we need the aliens to open through a ritual. The two sides are an enlightened council and what is effectively a monarchic society with one alien basically claiming divinity. While I do like the minor lore additions, and I do find them nice overall, Rakatta Prime unfortunately still has the large issue in that it's a pacing killer. We were never told about the planet before departing from the 5th star map, and all this hype that we've generated to face the Starforge is now completely halted via the breaks, as we are forced to complete this planet. You should be max level, so the side quests are rewardless and kind of pointless too anyway, and the Civil War is a simple battle between scientific progress, good, and religious fundamentalism, bad. The best way to play this planet is to screw up when talking to the one immediately after landing, exterminating his side and rushing to the temple to complete the planet as fast as possible. Speaking of which, the temple is bland and the boss fight against Bastila is kind of meh. This is really the moment you decide to play light side or dark side. If light side, like I say, meh. If dark side, Carth runs away and can only reappear as cut content. Juhani, unless you killed it on Dantooine, and Jolee are both killed at the temple, with Bastila saying one sentence to Juhani, which is lovely, but I wish they had more of a relationship between these two. And you can do the single most diabolical thing in the game and force manipulate Zaalbar to kill mission. Wow, that's dark. Hey, dark side was actually ran well for once. Although I will point out how funny it is that the two falls to the dark side in Star Wars media resorts in killing the old black Jedi and then slaughtering a child. With that, we have completed all the non-combat planets and locations in KOTOR, so it's a fitting time for a brief retrospective. Ultimately, planets in the KOTOR series have a large problem about feeling inorganic. While your character may naturally run into a problem, they'll almost never run into someone attempting a solution. Planets can often feel empty because they almost always rely on your character undertaking some action to progress them, where others don't. KOTOR 2 will occasionally make a point about this, but KOTOR never does. I bring this up because as nice as our planets might have been in KOTOR, they still fall short of something like Deus Ex's Hong Kong. Hong Kong is primarily comprised of the Wan Chai market, canals, residentials, blocked off underground traffic tunnels, and a nightclub. In Wan Chai, you get to see the treachery of both triads as their scripted encounters show how they really aren't that different from each other, as well as the irreverence they can have around police. There's no option to intervene in either the restaurant or the child thief scenarios. In the canals, you can get attacked by drug dealers if you don't mind your business, and a guy who mistakes you for your brother will try to ignore you when you try to talk to him. In the underground tunnels, you can find a gang war using swords. You can influence the outcome, but it does not matter. People in the nightclub are just there to drink and dance. It's world building. It's an ambience. The fact that you can't influence everything makes the location seem larger than it really is. It doesn't stop to a halt until you intervene. It will continue on with or without you. It makes the location seem organic. It feels like the world carries on regardless of if you interact with it or not. This is something I guess both creators could work on, I feel, but more specifically the first one. In KOTOR, it never feels like I've stepped into something that isn't my business and I should leave. You just show up and Jesus everyone's problem. Which KOTOR 2 at least gets philosophical about, making an argumentative point about whether you should agree or disagree. Technically, KOTOR has a couple of these moments on Taris, and KOTOR 2 has a couple of these moments on Nar Shaddaa, and Onderon itself as well. There's just not enough of these moments though. But I've extended my tangent long enough, so let's finish this with the Starforge, the culmination we've been working to for most of the game. The worst location in the entire game, and series too. When landing, we see a few Jedi battling Sith already at the landing zone, but unlike Jedi Academy or KOTOR 2, will disappointingly never lead any forces into battle as all the Jedi get killed near immediately, even if we're dark side aligned. What we instead have to look forward to is infinite spawning enemies. Yay! Because if there's one thing I'm overjoyed with to see in any game I'm struggling to progress in, is infinite spawning enemies. Almost the entire location is straight up combat with only token dialogue from Bastila, Malak, and Zaalbar if you brought him up after making him kill mission. Despite being outnumbered 2 to 1 and knowing you were life debt, Zaalbar will call you out and attack you, marking this as the only time I actually ever respected him. As everything is combat, you'll want to take companions who can punch above their weight in a fight. I foolishly had brought Carth because I thought the guy who had been assigned so much prominence by the game would prove a big deal in some dialogue that evidently never existed. On the light side, the best options are both available Jedi, Jolee, and Juhani. If however you go full dark side, you get Bastila and a choice of T3, HK, or Canderous. Other than the half decent, half boring visuals, the only thing worth mentioning is the Bastila to fight, or the 3 random placeholders. Ironically, the light side path has you do it alone, whereas the dark side has you fight alongside a companion, in Bastila. Weird. Dark side Bastila talks about being weak and not as strong as you when you beat her, because my greatness hasn't been beaten over my head all game, and professing her love if you romance her, which could still not redeem her character's writing, nor could the final fight redeem Malak's. Both poorly written till the end. There's nothing else to say about the Starforge. Obviously it was going to be mostly combat, but still it came up so flat. I figured I should mention combat somewhere in this criticism, but I actually don't have a problem with it. It seems to be a great gatekeeper for new players who don't enjoy it, which is fair enough. Honestly though, I think it's fine. My only gripe is the lack of variation for our flurry, power attack, and critical strike animations. Like, what, we couldn't afford to have 3 each? There is multiple variations of the base attack, which I'm not sure any player has ever used once they've unlocked any level of the 3 aforementioned feats. Some balance feels unfortunate. The only occasional advantage a lightsaber has over a vibroblade to begin with is its initially irrelevant blaster reflection capabilities. Otherwise, the vibroblade you have just keeps doing more damage initially. There are also many armors which prevent characters from using force powers, kind of making these armors irrelevant to consider because, like I say, you will primarily be running a party full of Jedi. Side note on the armors, why can't we pick up the beige Jedi robes present on most other Jedi? They look great. While I'm talking about gameplay mechanics, let's talk about how useless most skills are in this game, starting with computer use. Computer use is a skill that allows the user to interface with and slice computer terminals using computer spikes. Well, more specifically, you can always interface and slice, but computer use determines how few spikes you require per action. The uses for slicing a terminal usually fall under one of 4 things: opening a door, downloading a map, a combat option, which is usually overloading a terminal in a room, or skipping a puzzle. These 4 things can usually be achieved instead by bashing a door, walking around the locale, having combat skills of your own, or just solving the puzzle normally. You know, all things you can do naturally by just playing the game. Next up we've got repair. Repair, functionally, is in many ways similar to computer use. Now we can repair down droids using part kits to help us in combat instead. Repair also allows droids to heal more damage when using repair kits, and as aforementioned is required through his assassination protocols if we want to give HK-47 better stats. Ironically, despite their superfluous nature, computer use and repair are some of the better skills for characters to have, even if that isn't saying much. Next up is demolitions. I was going to argue that demolitions was the last of the offensive combat skills, but that doesn't really work. This skill can be used to set, disarm, or recover mines. Note that demolition doesn't increase the damage dealt by mines, it just makes sure you can set them properly. Which you won't, mind you, as mines are a defensive tool and 98% of encounters happen because you approach the enemy. So only disarming or recovering them really matters. Except they don't, because mines both don't deal enough damage in this game, and you're also not strapped for cash to require selling them either, failing to justify this skill. Stealth could have an argument made as the single least necessary skill. You have to use a stealth field generator, which will replace whatever belt equipment you already have equipped. That probably gives much better stats to your character. The use of stealth allows the character to move around enemies and take actions, including setting and interacting with mines, using computers, repairing droids, opening doors or containers without aggravating the enemies you're around. Fun fact, you can do all of these unmolested by killing any enemies around first and skipping stealth altogether. Admittedly, it does give you a free hit for combat that would proc your sneak attack, but you'll either use it early in the game when you don't have a good sneak attack feat, or later in the game when force powers that stun enemies will give you a sneak attack bonus anyway. Stealth is unnecessary, but worse, it's slow. Awareness. Awareness is a character's ability to see hidden threats, either enemies using stealth or mines, which are always hidden by default. Fun fact, enemies don't use stealth in this game, so half its usage can't be applied to you or your companions. But if you yourself run stealth, I suppose the enemies use awareness to discover you. Spotting mines is the skill's realistic only use, but then again, as I point out, mines don't deal that much damage to justify this skill. Security. Security is used to open things, whether doors or containers. Funnily enough, however, you can either bash everything open or hack anything else using a designated passkey you'll find in a level. Security is only used to speed up bashing and get into the Sith base on Taris, T3's entire existence. Treat injury. Treat injury improves the amount of damage healed when medpack is used. Note this does not apply to force, cure, or heal. You know, the regenerating medpack. This means it will help you either on Taris when you are not teleporting back to your apartment for free heals, or in rare cases against boss fights. It has very limited usage. And lastly, the only skill that really matters, Persuade. Only your player, the main character, can get this. Persuade options appear in dialogue and adds new options, usually either granting more money or experience based on the outcome. As a whole in RPGs, Persuade is usually a great option to pick, but personally I wish it wasn't included. Many games will have quests that will lock away the best outcome for a quest or character if you don't have Persuade, and that feels very cheap. No, this is not unique to KOTOR. Hell, some quests become a fun mold way up when there isn't a best option, like the serial killer quest from Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines. In the sequel KOTOR 2, quite a few skills get more usage across the board. Bashing containers will most usually break items inside, so you'll either want security or demolition so you can access these containers unmolested. Awareness also gets a handful of dialogue options. Treat injury and stealth, well, yeah, they're still pretty much useless, but I'm digressing. Back to this game. It's funny that despite the fact that Persuade is the only real useful skill in this game, you'll still have access to all the others as your companions can't pick Persuade. Not that they'd get anything from it. Despite having access to all these other skills though, at best they commonly just speed up processes that usually don't take long to begin with. It does, however, mean that picking your character's classes, specifically Scoundrel and Jedi Sentinel, is questionable as skills aren't really worth prioritizing over feats or force powers. Guess who chose that exact combination on their first playthrough when they couldn't have known any better? One of the recurring motifs you've heard me rant about throughout this video is just how beginner unfriendly this game is. This game is chock full of options, with just so many of them being dead ends. You didn't have this info the first time you played. You didn't know which skills are worthless. You didn't know how to efficiently build a character. You didn't know about all your companions' side quests. There are many ways to build a character in this game, from skills to force powers. But most of the options are wrong and only a select few are worth prioritizing. This detail doesn't change on multiple playthroughs. This is the tragedy. This game is neither for beginners nor for returning players. As a beginner, you are swamped by dead-end choices that are useless, but as a returning player, you are swamped by those choices that aren't dead-end. Suppose you are trying to win. Every dark side run, you'll nab the 3 levels of force speed, 3 levels of Force Lightning, and 2 levels of Death Field for certain. These are so good in comparison to everything else that they are relatively required. 8 out of your 13 dark side powers are chosen for you. Every run. Every run you'll grab one of the advanced combat strikes. Every run you'll grab the skill Persuade. It's the illusion of choice that KOTOR tries to present. It gives you options, but then takes them away. They were never really options to begin with. They are that suboptimal. A low number of levels means less resources. Less resources means you have to prioritize the required ones. Your Force Lightning, your Persuade. That's why level hoarding to Dantooine is a recommendation from the player base. Taris is traditionally viewed as a slog, and by level hoarding, you make it worse. You intentionally play the game wrong, to have more options and a better time later on. Why can't we just have the more options and a better time everywhere without restricting ourselves to a challenge run each time? KOTOR isn't worth this effort, it's just stingy. You'll use 2 lightsabers, that way you get 4 or 6 crystals buffing your stats at the end of the game. Wielding 2 lightsabers both has more damage output, and more importantly, better buffs for your character's attributes and skills than wielding just 1 lightsaber. You have more options with 2 lightsabers, so you lose the option to have 1 lightsaber. This is the problem with replaying the game. It has so much to offer, but its flawed design funnels you. You may still decide to take these suboptimal options for whatever reason you prefer, of course. But wouldn't it be better if they weren't suboptimal, if they were instead viable options? The last part of this game I will touch upon is the endings. One of the points people like to bring up when discussing which of the 2 KOTORs is better is the endings. People bitch about KOTOR 2 having shit endings, which, okay, fair enough. KOTOR 2 finishes on a cliffhanger that never went anywhere as a sequel, Knights of the Old Republic 3, was never made, at least at this time in 2026, and its continuation in the Revan novel and Star Wars The Old Republic RPG wasn't encouraging to say the least. In KOTOR 2's defense, however, the game did become synonymous with the words cut content on account of the game's rushed development. While KOTOR 3 got 3 years to work on, KOTOR 2 had just a 13-month development time, or so I can find. As such, a lot of things had to be rushed to finalize the game, and Malachor 5 has a lot of loose threads, even in the near-mandatory restored contents mod. Avalon himself, the writer for KOTOR 2, wasn't happy with the ending, although I will note that Avalon took a big influence from the ending of Empire Strikes Back, and thus a slightly downbeat, yet very ambiguous ending that relies on the suspense and direction from a sequel that never came, would almost always lead to disaster. But enough about KOTOR 2. What about this game's endings? While it technically had cut content, KOTOR doesn't share the same development issues, both for the game and a sequel that never came. So if it didn't share KOTOR 2's development troubles, surely the endings are better, right? Not really, no. The standard endings of any RPG with the diverging good/evil pathways are as follows. For good, it is defeat the big bad controlling the ultimate power for evil uses, and then destroy the ultimate power despite the fact there's no reason to, and then someone claims that when evil inevitably returns, you'll be there to face them. Evil, by contrast, has a slightly different route. Defeat either the high good protecting the ultimate power, or the big bad controlling the ultimate power for evil uses, and then use the ultimate power to eliminate good permanently, leaving you in an eternal, uncontested reign. Firstly, I always had an issue with the lack of parity here. Good is all like, evil has been beaten today, but it will return sometime. Meanwhile, evil is, good's been beaten, will it return? Lol, never. Secondly, KOTOR is impressive in the sense that not only does it copy-paste these exact 2 endings, but even throws in the generic, congratulations, you won a medal ending, that everyone has already seen in A New Hope in the light side ending, before stating they'll count on you when evil strikes again. It's like your office boss saying, congratulations for saving the world, and we still expect to see you Monday 9 AM on the dot. Of note is that Juhani, HK47 and Bastila are on the sides of your party, because they might not even make it to the end of the game. The light side ending is printout generic. Perhaps the dark side ending is better. Lol, no, it's even worse. The dark side ending is probably the dumbest possible ending they could have come up with. It's literally the generic evil ending, but even worse. Like, how? This ending sees Darth Revan overthrow Malak and then uses Bastila's battle meditation to crush the Republic assault on the Starforge, before using said Starforge to, presumably going by Bastila, conquer the core worlds, implying the imminent destruction of the Republic. Yeah, real original. What makes this ending so stupid is the lack of progression or the awareness that would have to accompany it. From the title crawl, it is stated that Revan and Malak had formed a Sith Empire and are attacking the Republic with them on the brink of the collapse, and the one thing stalling the Sith advance is Bastila and her battle meditation, who's been ambushed by the Sith forces. What we can take away from the title crawl is as follows. 1. Revan and his apprentice have been in control of a Sith Empire, and is 2. Beating the Republic into a pulp, now that 3. Bastila is no longer in a position to help the Republic. By the end of the dark side run, we have 1. Revan and his apprentice in control of the Sith Empire, and is 2. beating the Republic into a pulp now that 3. Bastila is no longer in a position to help the Republic as Revan's new apprentice. The only difference from the start to the end of the game is Revan's reinstatement after a less than 2-year vacation to Dantooine, to which his predecessor was basically seat warming, and will replace Malak with Bastila. Usually, one of the pieces of advice given to people when writing a story is to start with the start and end points A and B, and then write a story between them to get from one point to the other. Here we have gone from start point A to the end point B, a massive circle. This doesn't inherently make the ending bad. Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Minds is kind of like this and is my favourite movie. Perhaps a better example would be 12 Monkeys though. But it doesn't work here. The reason it doesn't work is it's too ambiguous in its ending to have a message, like say Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, or to show an important change, as in 12 Monkeys. In 12 Monkeys, the presence of a key character in the finale likely implies there is an optimistic ending. A better dark side ending would have been to have Bastila stab Revan in the back with her lightsaber, showing both the philosophy of how all Sith are driven towards being at the top no matter if they have to walk over friends, and highlighting just how little Revan has learned from deciding to change absolutely nothing. At the very least, a shot like the final one in Death of Stalin would have been a perfect choice, implying other Sith are already painting a target on Revan's back. Instead, there's nothing, because this vague ending is the exact same premise we started the game with, and never incorporated or explained anything in this ending to imply, well, an ending. This whole journey was to mirror Revan's past steps to getting where he was back on top, but fails to predict anything relating to the future. This is the single most important things that endings are supposed to do. KOTOR 2's ending, that was supposed to be ambiguous, tells more, mentioning your companion's faith, setting up what your character's goals are and implying what you may face. Once again, now that I'm thinking about it, the first story, that of Malak and Revan finding the star maps, would have made for a much better game. Ultimately though, the large issue that both these endings face is a severe lack of personalization. I haven't really spoken about the light side ending because it's just flat. A better ending would have focused on showing where all your characters you helped in side missions ended up. This would have been better for both endings in fact. Instead, neither ending says anything specific about your character, likely because it didn't want to assign a personality to a character who you, the player, would get to choose a plethora of options about how they act, even if the writing for this game isn't good enough to have this concern. The issue of being completely generic is highlighted by another story's endings. Not only is this story a Star Wars property, but it too is a video game, and it was released half a decade before Knights of the Old Republic did. I am of course talking about Star Wars Dark Forces 2 Jedi Knight, released in 1997. Star Wars Dark Forces 2 Jedi Knight, man that's a mouthful, I sure hope that series doesn't get any weird naming conventions, also has 2 endings, one light side and one dark side. Fun fact, they are functionally the same endings, but much better. Our light side ending sees our protagonist and player character defeat the big bad of the game, sealing away the ultimate power in the process to celebratory music that I won't be playing for licensing reasons. Both games' light side endings cutscenes last about a minute and a half each, 130 vs 140. Dark Forces 2, however, shows Kyle Katarn refuse to execute the unarmed Dark Jedi Jarek. Yes, it's a horrible name, I know. When Jarek taunts Kyle about executing his father and tells Kyle to join the dark side by striking him down. This is wonderful because it shows Kyle's motivation for facing Jarek and demonstrates how Kyle has learnt from his Jedi ways to reject the dark side and choose not to continue the same path the fallen Jedi Jarek had followed. Another nice touch is the end of the cutscene where Kyle thanks his father and has carved into the generic statues the faces of his dad, Morgan Katarn, and his Jedi mentor, Kuran. It feels respectful, which is a far stronger way of depicting the protagonist's appreciations of his relationships than a bunch of smiles to his companions. Half of which I know for a fact you did not use once you were no longer scripted to do so. In roughly the same time, Dark Forces 2 not only depicted everything KOTOR's ending did, but was also able to remind us about our main character's personal motivations outside of the larger Save the Universe, but still says something meaningful about moving on from the past and the ideals they're setting for their future through the contrasting depiction of our villain rejecting redemption, and still also has a nice send-off to our companions who aren't even present. Even if we count Malak's talk about redemption before the final cutscene, it still fails to convey him as a lost cause because of the uncertainty. Just one more thing the writing of KOTOR fumbles the ball with. Now let's do a comparison of the dark side endings. One puts your character in the same position as they were less than 2 years ago, with one tiny adjustment that realistically will make a difference that will amount to all of nothing, without making any commentary on the fact that nothing's changed to make this ending interesting in the slightest. Dark Forces 2, on the other hand, has an ending that can be compared to the scene where Palpatine arrives on the Death Star in Episode 6. Same shuttle, similar black attire, and Taris acts as a stand-in for Darth Vader, also being ordered to handle business busy work. After Katarn dispatches Taris, he then sits on a throne and plays the same recording from his father as he had when we were first introduced to Kyle at the start of the game, before he crushes the recording with his boot. This is once again a far better ending. Firstly, the power acquired from the Valley of the Jedi and comparisons to Darth Sidious helps establish Katarn, in his new role as Emperor, as a detriment to the galaxy. A position that, unlike Revan, he was never in to begin with, so it still feels like we've accomplished forward progress. Secondly, when he tells Taris to wipe out the rebel uprising on Danuda, he mentions to extinguish them painfully. It shows how far his personality has progressed, and how much our protagonist has changed from the upbeat version we see at the beginning. Lastly, and what I consider most important, there's a feeling of emptiness present. The biggest difference in the comparison between Dark Forces 2 ending and Palpatine's landing on the Death Star is the lack of people present, the squads of color-coordinated personnels. This admittedly could be because they weren't able to get enough extras into the game's FMV cutscenes and didn't have a workaround, but as it stands, it leaves the impression that Kyle Katarn is living in a barren environment. The wide shots are always empty of people, which again, could be the game's limitations, but it adds to the sterile, empty ambiance, especially when we consider the final shot of Kyle stomping the recording of his late father's "I'm proud of you," highlighting how Kyle is choosing to forego relationships with others. Much of the game's two endings can harken back to Kuran's philosophy present in the game's manual, through his quote of, "With the Force, there are two paths, good and evil, one may take, nothing in between. One leads to a full life, no matter the years. Justice, knowledge, and compassions are both endeavors and rewards. The other is most assuredly a short path that leads to untamed power. With nothing to earn, it leads to a certain solitary end. One should choose wisely." Katarn also stated he has no time for petty uprising, despite us seeing him immediately sitting on a throne in a completely empty room. This leads to the impression that Katarn has achieved everything already with his ultimate power, and now has nothing left to aspire to. A certain solitary end indeed. What I like about this ending is that, unlike KOTOR's, the atmosphere present suggests that this should not be treated as a good thing for our protagonist. By all means, you can still enjoy the ending of being a galactic emperor, but it's also not something to be celebrated. The ending is what it is. Through all the Empire's might, it still captures the feeling of its hollowness. As Kuran stated in a parallel to one of Yoda's Empire Strike Back quotes, "For you, the choice is the dark side. Forever will it dominate your destiny." Even this game handles nostalgia better than KOTOR. The dark side is not something glorious, it's not something to aspire to. Living a life dominated by your negative emotions is just sad. KOTOR 2's endings may have been disappointing and basically one and the same, but they did have that slightly upsetting, ambiguous feeling that left me in the same feeling as I've heard people felt after watching Empire Strikes Back when it came out. By contrast, KOTOR 1 has two endings that both left me upset for quite the wrong reasons. It is clear I do not like KOTOR. I've spent the better part of about an hour and 45 minutes complaining about Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic. But why specifically this game has left such a bad taste in my mouth? Why am I this passionately opposed to it? When you ask almost anyone what the best Star Wars video game is, be that WatchMojo, IMDb, IGN, Reddit, or just about anyone ranking them, the most overrepresented answer is usually Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic, if it doesn't just outright take the top spot. Star Wars video games in general are great. and not just from the perspective of games based off film properties. Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic 2 Restored Contents Mod, the Jedi Knight series, Battlefront 2 2005 Classic are the best I've played, but I've also enjoyed Jedi Fallen Order, Empire at War, Galactic Battlegrounds, even if Age of Mythology is better than Age of Empires 2. And that's not to mention the other ones like Rogue Squadron, Force Unleashed, Republic Commandos, LEGO Star Wars, Bounty Hunter, The Revenge of the Sith tie-in game, Shadows of the Empires, TIE Fighter, Galaxies, etc. Star Wars games comprise some of the best video games in all of gaming. The bar is set to a very high standard. So why is Knights of the Old Republic 1 the answer that's most often given? Especially when its sequel KOTOR 2 is, admittedly with the requirement of a Restored Contents mod, better in almost every aspect. The personality of our main character, the average quality of our companions, definitely the villains, gameplay both combat and leveling up wise, I would argue the planets, except Tilo Surface does suck in that game, and perhaps most importantly, the story. One that doesn't require an earth-shattering twist that honestly wouldn't have changed the game if it was removed. The only thing that KOTOR does better than the sequel, and probably why it's so popular, is its palatability. Unlike KOTOR 2, which you might not like, and obviously you don't have to, it's a generic adventure about a ragtag group of heroes facing the evil Emperor. It's easy for anyone to get into Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic. Unfortunately, it's also like a wafer that is 40 meters in length. It lacks depth in the places that matters, it's long without much of a payoff, and it's largely flavorless. Star Wars Battlefront 2 2005 Classic, the first one, showed more emotion and depth to its main cast in the 18 minutes of 501st Diaries than KOTOR showed in its 30 to 40 hour runtime. Star Wars Jedi Academy had a more heartfelt and better written darkside ending, and that story is at best alright. Gameplay loops can't really be compared across genres, so let's just consider that finally I received my lightsaber satisfaction. In KOTOR, it fails to make an immediate impact as you already have vibroblades more powerful, and your lightsaber does next to no damage to the Star Map Guardians, one of the first enemies you'll use it on. In the Jedi Knight series, and Battlefront 2, it's immediately your most powerful weapon and will cleave any enemy in 1 to 2 hits. The lightsaber received in the Jedi Knight series is the endgame. It's balanced by the fact that your character does not have the skills to use it, both in stance variation and more importantly, lacks the Force abilities. The Revan reveal, while an impressive plot twist, adds realistically unneeded context. Our relationship with Malak and the rest of our companions wouldn't change regardless. In theory, this revelation is even better than Darth Vader being Luke's father. Unfortunately, it fails to influence the direction of the narrative. When Vader is being Luke's father, it leads to his redemption in Return of the Jedi, or Darth Traya, if you can count that, being responsible for the entire final act of KOTOR 2. The amazing Bastila probably isn't any better than Juno and Galen Marek. Definitely not better than Ewan Atten or Kyle and Jan. If even generally considered mediocre aspects of other games can match KOTOR's highest sung praises, then why should this game be considered above its better contemporaries? It's honestly a darn shame, because when I think about the Dantooine police investigation, or Elise Montan's droid quests, the general atmospheres and political sayings of Manaan and Korriban, the fun swoop bite races, Calo Nord's 1, 2, 3 introduction, etc., all moments I've replayed the game for to get recording footage for this video. I come to the conclusion that there's actually a lot of good present in this game, but it is outnumbered significantly by just too much waste. It can be funny at times, but it chooses not to be. Video Donkey uses this graphic to describe Assassin's Creed. Personally, I think it's perfectly suited to explain KOTOR. KOTOR is filmed to the brim with aspects that aren't necessarily bad per se, just bland. Some definitely are bad, make no mistake. It's in this retrospect that KOTOR fails to entertain, as a game that's consistently good would be able to. And that's it. Other Star Wars games are more consistently fun than this. Why is a game that is so consistently boring in the Hall of the Greats? There are other issues with the game too, a bug that causes Juhani's questline to prevent other companions' questlines from starting, memory overload skipping voice lines, and game crashing after having saved too many times. However, I don't feel that any of these, inconvenient as these bugs may be, are enjoyment breaking. No, KOTOR manages to do that on its own. At the end of the day, KOTOR's greatest enemy is itself. It fights itself in most aspects of the game. A morality system that funnels you into choosing only between two options, limiting your options down to one once you've committed to either light side or dark side, weakly written companions, and even worse villains. And of those 9 companions, we can only use 2 less than 1/4 at any given time. No wonder I missed all their side quests. A mind-shattering reveal that effectively amounts to your companions declaring, "Gee whiz, that sure is something," and does not alter either of the 2 paths you were already heading down, be that light side or dark side, or change the dynamic your protagonist has with even a single relation, be that companion or ex-bestie turned evil emperor, a leveling system that through the level cap effectively punishes you and your maximum enjoyment of the game, no faster traversal method without force speed that the game actually sort of tells you about properly, or a way to make running back and forth more fun so you can actually experience the scenery instead of skipping it. For more than half the planets, the setting of the game, they are boring or have glaring issues. And to top it off, some of the weakest, blandest copy-paste endings I've seen. Don't even get me started on always having to go first in Kashyyyk. If only there was a game that improved on most of these weaknesses, had a likable protagonist, well-handled characters with spotlight moments that build their characters, good spotlight moments, villains that leave impacts, a leveling system that allows you to start as the fun classes with force powers, and despite having a class change system, it does not encourage you to hoard levels or skip early XP. Force speed available from the beginning for almost the entire game, generally speaking better planets that have a metaphorical reference to your past, present and future, as well as dialogue so well written I could make a Bartlett's from just that game alone. The game will still have problems, but the peaks are worth it because it actually consistently has peaks. It's a game that's fun. Unlike Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic.